5 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning to you. What is that? We should do some experiments together, shouldn't we? So why is it that sometimes when you've had a weekend off, when we say goodbye to each other on Friday, and then we say hello again on Monday, sometimes it feels like 2 minutes has passed, and sometimes it feels like ages and ages have passed. What are the secrets of making, what's the word? Is it etiolating? Is a fancy word for stretching out? Is that right? I've probably used it incorrectly. Attenuating? What's the word for stretch? Well, elongating's a bit. I would let you know me. I like to use 14 syllables when 2 would do. But anyway, what is the secret psychologically of stretching out the weekend? I think doing something on Friday night is probably quite a good idea. Or maybe getting up early, doing some gardening makes the weekend feel a bit longer. Anyway, I digress slightly. Partly because I'm a little wary of the first topic that we're going to discuss together. And by wary, I mean I turn to it with a heavy heart. And the reason for that is I've felt for some time that immigration was about to make an almighty comeback as a very destructive force, rhetorically speaking, a very destructive journalistic and political force in this country. If you think about it, there is an inevitability to right-wing media and right-wing politics trying desperately once again to turn immigration in any way, shape or form. I think the days of fondly and naively believing that people were able or indeed keen to make a distinction between refugees and perhaps people coming here under the radar or illegally in a genuine, literal sense. I think the days of thinking people were keen to make that distinction or even perhaps to understand it are probably behind us. But the desperation is so easy to understand, the people that told you that leaving the European Union would make it easier to control our borders couldn't start screaming immediately, could they, about the fact that it actually made it considerably harder. Withdrawal from the Dublin Agreement means that the ease with which people whose asylum applications are adjudged to be or have failed cannot be easily sent back to other European Union countries. The relationship with France, which politicians keep queuing up to talk about the importance of, has been completely turned upside down by withdrawing from the European Union. Even our border moved, didn't it, in many ways, from Calais back to Dover. So, again, what's the Daily Mail going to tell you about the relationship between immigration in any way, shape or form and Brexit? Is it going to tell you the truth, do you think? Nigel Farage going to pop up, is he, on your telly and start telling you that, Brexit was a terrible mistake because it's actually much harder now to deal with failed asylum seekers? And of course, the years of very toxic far-right politics pushes us towards a place where we are now. A place where there are no legal routes to come into this country if you're fleeing wars, of course, which in the case of Afghanistan and Syria and elsewhere, we have made no small contribution to, either in terms of personnel, boots on the ground, or political support, or indeed weaponry. So people fleeing famine, people fleeing war, people fleeing all sorts of horrible things have no safe way to get here. They've all been closed down in pursuit of short-term political wins, which haven't really paid off. You then have, over the last few months, a big spike in people trying to come here from Albania who probably are not as deserving of welcome or support or sympathy as people fleeing places like Syria and Afghanistan. It's a disproportionate spike in the very short-term recent months. But of course, put that in the hands of racist agitators and it will be 2 minutes before Twitter is full of people claiming that all the people trying to come here are from Albania, so why should we be looking after any of them anyway? The point is that even if you want to focus upon an uptick in Albanian applications, the more efficient and speedier our application process is, the more efficiently and speedily we actually process applications, then the quicker you can deal with the people who don't deserve to be welcomed and offered refuge from whatever horrors it is that they have fled. So what has Suella Braverman done? Well, according to reports, she has deliberately ignored legal advice, talking about how much of the system has sort of reached logjam, culminating in an outbreak of diseases like diphtheria and scabies in horribly overcrowded processing centres, that she has reportedly ignored legal advice, telling her to get her skates on. Do you know, here's a phrase I never thought I'd said. Grant Shapps put in a pretty good performance for the week that he was in the Home Office. Do you remember that week when Grant Shapps was Home Secretary? They'll be singing about it in folk songs in years to come, won't they? I won't attempt to come up off the top of my head with the sort of folk song they might sing about Grant Shapps' 6 days in the Home Office, but he was actually seeking out accommodation for people so they could be moved through these centres. Suella Braverman reportedly has elected to leave them in there. So there is so much going on under the surface on this story. But the facts of the matter, and this is why I said I'd come to the topic with a heavy heart, the facts of the matter aren't going to get a look in. They never do. It was bound to happen. I wasn't sure when it was going to happen. I wasn't sure how it was going to happen. But the right-wing media and the usual attention-seeking, cynical, xenophobic, rabble-rousing scumbags are going to be back in business anytime soon. And we're just as powerless to stand up to the ancient hatreds that they stoke and foment as we were the last time. You'd think, wouldn't you, looking back 6 years, you'd think that people go, do you know what, I might not listen to them this time. Do you know what, I might not get all frightened and angry about issues that I'm being ordered by right-wing interest to get frightened out. Maybe I'll pause a little bit and actually genuinely try to see sense or feel rational. No chance at all. It's immigration. You immediately have to start chomping at the bit like a rabid dog. And then you come to the events of last night, which were, or yesterday, which were just grim. Witnesses described seeing a laughing man target a processing facility in Dover with 3 improvised devices before, and quick trigger warning now, before he apparently killed himself at a nearby petrol station. And then here it is, 1, 2, 3, third paragraph of the front page of the Daily Mail. It came amid new fears over the number of arrivals and the conditions they are being held in. Okay, just imagine that this was a terror attack of the kind that we are currently more familiar with. Imagine if it was the Finsbury Park Mosque that was under attack, and that the third paragraph of the story had read, well, it came amid new fears that there are too many Muslims in this country and that the election of politicians like Sadiq Khan is somehow diluting our Anglo-Saxon heritage. Right? Imagine if it was an Islamist terror attack, and the third paragraph of the Daily Mail's front page story said something like, it came amid new fears that non-believers were leading the population into heretical behaviour. And I don't even know what they would say if they were trying to suggest that the concerns of the actual person doing the attack were the third paragraph of the front page story. Right, stop a minute, because this hadn't even hit me as hard as it should have done. Just have a little think about this. A man who is currently described as having mental health issues has launched 3 bombs at a facility full of human beings, many of whom will be refugees. There are children in that facility. A man has thrown bombs at humans. Right? Why it's not been called a terror attack, we will have to wait and see. As far as I can tell from the photographs that I've seen, the hand that is emerging from the car window with a petrol bomb in it is white. I don't know, maybe that's got something to do with it. So a man has thrown bombs at humans, or in the hope of reaching humans. And the third paragraph of the Daily Mail's front page story is about the new fears over the number of arrivals. And look, to be fair, and the conditions they are being held in, because the Daily Mail really cares about that. Oh yeah, page after page after page after page of editorial explaining why they deserve, at the very least, clean and safe surroundings. You remember all those articles by all those Daily Mail columnists about why these people deserve clean and safe surroundings. Yeah. Me neither. So that's why I come to the story with a very heavy heart today. It's a story about a bomb attack. We won't call it a terror attack. We'll wait for the police to tell us what and why we should be doing. A bomb attack upon people in Britain. I think the language is so important here. A bomb attack on people in Britain. And the Daily Mail thinks that the third most important element, or the third paragraph of the story, is the number of migrants who have reached the UK so far this year, which stands at nearly 40,000. Not even a football crowd, is it, at somewhere like Old Trafford? So there is a really grim depiction of a corner, a big fat corner of our country. It's not our whole country, of course it isn't. But if you're looking for a similarly large platform or a similarly well-supported platform to put forward some of the points I'm putting forward now, you're never going to find it. Most powerful newspapers in the country, the government, most of the cabinet, they will be entirely on board with this mode of reporting a bomb attack upon people in this country. The third paragraph of the front page story talks about fears over the number of arrivals, and just in case there aren't enough fears over the number of arrivals, here's the latest number in the next sentence. So the question of how anyone could end up being radicalised, if indeed that turns out to be relevant to this sort of story, and it wasn't just a coincidence that the bombs this fellow was keen to lob out of his car window were directed at a migrant processing centre. It was a complete coincidence. If he'd taken a different turning at the last roundabout, he could have been bombing a recycling centre. So unless it turns out to be a complete coincidence, the question of radicalisation becomes relevant, and the answer is easier than it ever is with other forms of attack, isn't it? Who radicalises these people? Who is responsible for a visceral hatred of the human beings we call migrants? Would you like another clue? I'll give you another clue from, I'm not going to have it, am I, in front of me now? Another clue from the front page of the Daily Telegraph this morning, which talks about how migrants are staying in hotels, wait for it, alongside members of the public. That's the front page story. Migrants are staying in hotels alongside members of the public. Oh my God, alongside members of the public? But that's unbearable. That's how migrants side by side in hotels with public. And where do you think the idea comes from that these humans don't deserve the most basic respects and protections? Where does the dehumanizing come from, do you think, in a country where a Home Secretary can boast about dreaming of deporting people to Rwanda? Dreaming, actually dreaming. That's not a political position. That's not right-wing. That's psychological. Arguably, that's pathological. I dream of deporting people against their will to the other side of the world. I actively dream about it. And the Daily Telegraph journalist who's conducting the interview will chuckle along gaily at the thought. I dream of a Daily Telegraph. I bet she dreams of this one as well. Migrants side by side with actual migrants, side by side with real people, with actual humans, actual members of the actual British public, migrants, side by side. That's the front page. It's no wonder no one asks who radicalises these people, isn't it? Because we all know. Imagine that third paragraph in the Daily Mail. It came amid new fears over the proliferation of heretical views among non-Muslims. Now, I mean, since when does the third paragraph of a story after a bomb attack come up with possible reasons to justify it or explain it, rather than simply to condemn it? Simply to condemn it. One of the local MPs talked about tensions being high in the area because of the boat crossings. OK, that's fine then. That's fine. Someone lobs a petrol bomb through your window, it's because tensions are high in the area and we've got to do something about those tensions. Never mind about the people who've just been terrorised, because whether it's a terror attack or not, someone throws a petrol bomb at you, you're going to feel terrorised. Am I right? And that's the next chapter, lads. This is it now. It's out. It's out. The genie's out the bottle. This is what's going to happen. The next, the dedication, all the usual little unflushable turds will be bobbing around again in the toilet of British political and public discourse, and some decent people will get caught up in it. Some decent people will go along. Your mum buying the Daily Mail every morning, talking not about the people who had bombs thrown at them last night, but about the tensions in the area. The tensions in the area. Not about the actual attack, but about the new fears over the number of arrivals. And if you're not frightened enough, here in the same paragraph is the number, 40,000 this year, which is an absolute drop in the ocean, isn't it? And the figure for the number of applications that are actually approved by the time they've actually been processed, last time I checked, I think it was in the 80s. But they're all illegals. They're all illegals. None of them are illegal. You become an illegal immigrant after your application has been processed and rejected and you somehow abscond. Then you have no right to be here. Up until that point, under the terms of the Geneva Convention, I think, but certainly the Convention on Human Rights, you are an applicant. It's 20 minutes after 10. I didn't realise I was so upset about this, actually, because as I told you before, I hold it at bay. I don't like these stories. They really upset me because we live here. And we live alongside the people who will be more worried today about tensions in the area than they are about children who are currently having it explained to them by their parents why someone threw petrol bombs at the despicable condition in which they're living. 21 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And listen, for the avoidance of doubt, let's just tick a few boxes. You show me 100 people, there will be some among that number who are what we might loosely describe as wrong'uns. You take 1,000 people, there will be even more wrong'uns. But guess what? You show me 1,000 Capricorns, and the percentage of wrong'uns in that number will be the same percentage as wrong'uns if you showed me 1,000 Sagittariuses or 1,000 asylum applicants. The idea that you find one rotten apple and therefore you throw the whole barrel in the bin is just stupid. It's camouflage. It's an apology for racism. The worst kind of racism, which has been stoked up in this country to the detriment of everybody in it now for the best part of a decade. And we're about to start again. We're about to start again. I don't really know what to ask you, except, I don't think you can fault anything I've said, whether you like it or not. So I'll ask you this. Is there anything we can do to stop it? Is there anything we can do, once again, to stop the weaponization of vulnerable and desperate people by evil right-wing media and a deeply, deeply callous Conservative government? 0345 6060 973. 26 minutes after 10. You can probably tell after all the time we've spent together. Sometimes until I start talking to you, I haven't fully ordered my thoughts. But the fact that the Daily Mail has it in the third paragraph of a story about firebombs being thrown at humans in Britain, the third paragraph talks about new fears over the number of arrivals. In other words, a possible motive for the attack. Offered up not just in a sympathetic way, but in complete synchronicity with the editorial line that the Daily Mail has been following for the last several years. David's in Chorley. David, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, just to put this into context, we need to check ourselves before we wreck ourselves. It'll take 18 years. It'll take 18 years at a rate of 40,000 migrants per annum coming in before that even represents 1% of our population. Now, for what we've done to a lot of these countries over the empire years, and we've done some good stuff, but we've done some atrocious stuff, we need to just put the drawbridge down, let them over, let them have some compassion, some care.
Have a proper processing.
Yes,
not a.
absolutely.
I think, to be honest, the way the economy's going, that the chances of the world and his wife wanting to come here are probably diminishing every year. But in terms of, you need to have a proper system in place. I know you're not suggesting that we don't, but just for clarity.
Absolutely. Get a system in place, allow these people to give back to the communities that are going to help them, reach out and be pioneers of letting these people settle.
We've got job shortages. Even to fill some of the current vacancy levels, 40,000 a year isn't going to touch the sides. There's so much about this story that is heartbreaking, this combination of stories that's going on at the moment. But do you think, how many people do you think realise that the two main reasons for the massive surge in people coming over in small boats, which is apparently so emotionally provocative, is a combination of Brexit and the Dublin Agreement and the deliberate closure of safe and legal routes?
Well, at least 52% won't understand that, I would suggest.
That's probably a little unfair, and it's not often I gallop to the defence of the constituency that you describe. But it's the mode of reporting, isn't it? My God, why are so many people coming over in small boats? Because there's no other way to come here.
Yeah, shock and horror is what sells newspapers. And if they can get away with it, they'll blow things out of proportion. They'll try to animate the population into a frenzy.
But it will work, won't it, mate? I mean, you and I might be singing from a similar hymn sheet, but it's a bit like trying to get to nail jelly to the wall standing up to this sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep going, James. Doing a great job. Thank you.
Well, you say that. I mean, I mean, obviously, no one wants to tune into the radio to hear the gnashing of teeth and the wailing. But this story is, I mean, it's unbelievable. People who talk about patriotism, people in Britain under attack from a bomber, and the best-selling newspaper in the country gets to the third paragraph before it starts offering up a cautious justification of what's happened. I would say, those are my words. It came amid new fears over the number of arrivals. I'll say it again. Imagine it was an Islamist terror attack. And in the third paragraph of the story, they were writing, it came amid new fears of godless heresy overtaking the West. 10:29 is the time. It was an exceptionally long introduction this morning, for which I'm not going to apologise, but it does mean I've only been able to take one call so far before I head towards the news. So listen, you've got to stop telling me off, all right? You've got to be more like my mum. You've got to remind me. This is your show as much as it's mine, but I had an awful lot to get off my chest today, and the reason is because the aftermath of this attack, which thankfully failed. I mean, all this character has managed to do is burn a fence before taking his own life, which is a tragedy in and of itself, of course. But the reaction from politicians and right-wing media to almost immediately, not even almost, to immediately start talking about the things that probably led him to it, as if they're the problem. 10:30 is the time. Lottie Morley is here now with your headlines. 10:35. The other bit, usually half an hour into a conversation like this, the other bit that gets me is, and don't get cross with me about this, all right? I often think the people who feel this rage, the people who are, I'm told, taking to one comment section on one national newspaper in support of this bomber with messages of understanding and condolence and agreement with what he did. Terrorist sympathisers under one reading, although the authorities insist that this is not so far being treated as a terror attack. I do feel for them as well. You know, I was raised very much in the Christian faith, in the Catholic faith. Jesus' teachings are to turn the other cheek, always to believe in the fundamental good in everybody. So I often, when we get halfway into this conversation and the initial rage at the vile and racist rhetoric has begun to dissipate, or upon this occasion, the essential apologism for the attack, I can't imagine what it's like to live in a state of constant fury like this and hatred. About what, 40,000 desperate souls who've come in this year, and that number largely a consequence of the Brexit that you probably voted for as well because you were raging about something else back then. I mean, imagine what your life would be like if you didn't feel like this all the time. Everyone around you would be happier. You'd be more welcome in family gatherings, unless the whole family's on the same tip, I suppose, in which case presumably everything ends in a fight. It doesn't lead anywhere. No good can come of it. Unless you're a newspaper owner, in which case, cha-ching. Bob's in Devil's Bridge in Wales. Bob, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Hello, I've called before. I just wanted to say...
Are you sure?
Yeah.
And it said Devil's Bridge when you called last time?
I might have said West Wales last time.
Because I don't think I've ever seen Devil's Bridge. It just struck me when I saw it as an interesting, particularly on Halloween. You know,
well, indeed.
But if you find before then, obviously my old age is showing once again, and I've forgotten that I have seen that before on my screen. Carry on, Bob.
Well, all it was, I mean, I used to deliver newspapers when I was little, and I remember the old Labour government back in the day used to have a plan to give sort of a permanent place for people from the travelling community to stay in most sort of in different towns. I remember the Daily Mail headline the following morning when this policy was announced was brought, gypsy camps in every town, really screaming, kind of angry kind of thing.
Was it even as a kid that landed with you?
Yeah, and I mean, you scroll forward 20 years. I used to work for a local authority in the West Midlands, and there was a lady there, a colleague of mine, and she said what she wanted to do about all these migrant crossings, as she put it, she wanted to machine gun people in the water. She made the machine gun noise, and I remember it just stuck in my craw, just how I was absolutely shocked with this. And, we talk a lot about having a prevent strategy, don't we, and having a de-radicalisation strategy about certain issues. But what can you do when the press itself encourages radicalisation, radicalises people to look at other people as inhuman or less human or people that are worthy
of just the
being
press.
treated like that.
I'm afraid Suella Braverman has done it as well, very much so. And to a lesser extent, there's a word I never thought I'd say, to a lesser extent, Priti Patel and lots of the rest of them. And the answer is I don't know. I mean, if you're lucky enough to take a step back from things and see the radicalisation of anyone who thinks about throwing bombs at other human beings as being part of the same problem. The problem is the radicalisation. It's not the cause. The cause, I suppose I can think of some things where direct action might be justified, of fighting apartheid in South Africa or something like that. But just hating people for what and who they are is whether you're an Islamist terrorist or whether you're throwing bombs at a migrant processing centre. They seem to me to be the same. I don't quite understand. I can use the words like radicalisation like you do. I don't quite understand what's happened. It is a dehumanising and a fear as well. It must be born of fear, not just hatred. You must be frightened of these people to want to harm them.
But if you're picking those sorts of screaming headlines every day, it can't really do much. It can't really do much good for you. And I really think I appreciate there's important safeguards have to be there for freedom of the press as well.
Yes.
But I think there is an important argument to be made in this country that hasn't been made yet about responsible reporting. There's a distinction between sort of. You almost feel like sometimes the press is trying to stoke a mob.
Sometimes
versus
it's the business model, and it's not just the press. You do it in this line of work as well. You know, there've been plenty of people, even on this behind this microphone, who would have deployed language just like the words your colleague deployed with regards to the machine guns. Although they largely had the wisdom not to say it on the radio, they'd have been quite happily punting it out on social media or elsewhere. And I don't know. Maybe today's not the day to talk about helping them come to a place where their life is not defined by fury and anger, because we saw yesterday in Dover where that can, in the worst cases, lead. But this notion of radicalisation in plain sight, you think it happens indeed it does happen in the back rooms of mosques. And we write about it, or people write about it in sort of hushed tones and incredibly inflammatory rhetoric. But if it's happening on the front page of a national newspaper, it doesn't feel like radicalisation, does it? Because it's happening to your nan. It's happening to a local council worker in the Midlands who actually wants to shoot these people. And who wins? Who wins? I mean, if I was a politician, I've been in power for 12 years, and everything was in at best disarray and at worst complete chaos. If I'd been in power for 12 years and the rivers were full of shocking amounts of sewage, and the NHS was creaking at the seams, the public sector was looking at an exodus of disaffected, disillusioned workers, up to a third considering resignation in the coming year. If I'd been in power for 12 years and I'd sold Brexit to the country, I'd sold Boris Johnson to the country, if I'd been in power for 12 years, or if I edited a newspaper that had been cheerleading for the shower that have been in power for 12 years, I would probably be encouraging my readers to blame 40,000 migrants or a couple of hundred in a processing centre, a couple of thousand in a processing centre. And I'd probably be encouraging my readers to blame them for everything that's going on in this country, because the alternative would be to blame the people who are actually responsible for it. Shahid is in Archway. Shahid, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, mate.
Just reiterating your point, really. I think it's just the way the media covers. If you're so serious, it'd be comical. As you said, if the guy's name was Abdul, for example, or Ali, we
don't yet know what his name is, but you know, I understand the point that you're making, and it is mysterious, isn't it, that many infamous terror attacks were undertaken by people with a history of mental health problems, but this terror attack is not called, or this apparent terror attack is not being called a terror attack.
And that's the point, James. That, again, I mean, if the name was different, that guy could also have mental health problems, but that is never an issue. So we'd have sort of, moments of silence. We had people sort of coming on the news. I mean, yesterday, I'm sure you'd know, 100 people got killed in Somalia in a terrorist attack. And just in a square, innocent kids, women, children, etc., no mention of it anyway. People are sort of sending condolences to South Korea, and rightly so, because there's a huge tragedy there as well. But 100 people lost their lives and not a mention. Now, if you turned around, if that happened in Europe, or if you had in Ukraine, for example, now, it'd be wall-to-wall coverage. So it's just, I think, the media's way of sort of basically, again, marginalising one side against another. And
just judging from your name and your perspective, I mean, you're less likely to knock about with people who are susceptible to this kind of rhetoric. But it's not impossible, is it? I mean, particularly
not at all.
In the modern political climate, you could be a second generation Brit and still think, crikey, there's plenty of them in the cabinet, isn't there? Second generation Brits who can muster up. Sometimes it feels like even more hatred for people who are dreaming of becoming the parents of second generation Brits. Do you come across it yourself much?
Yeah, big time.
Really?
Big time, James. I mean, whether it's at work, whether it's sort of day-to-day lives, etc., I've come across sort of both sides. I am a second generation. Do you know what I mean? So the thing is, I understand I wasn't born here, but I think over the years that I've been here, I've contributed probably more than probably millions of indigenous sort of white British people to the country in terms of taxes I paid, etc.
Well, no, I know.
I'm still reminded that I'm not part of this country because you still get the old go back home. It's like, well, this is home. Do you know what I mean? So
I do know what you mean, and it is. Of course, it's all linked. You'd like to think it wasn't, but I salute your levity. You're laughing in the face of this sort of adversity because, of course, it's all linked. It's all gradations. It's all different points on the same scale. From throwing petrol bombs at people who are hoping of making a life here, to calling people with different coloured skin from you or people with Indian heritage, telling them they can never be properly British. It's all the same, and it's not sort of murky, bubbling away under the surface. I'm quite a naive fella, as you'll know if you've listened over the years. So as I get older, though, I realise just how completely gaslit this country has been for pretty much my entire life. We call it political correctness, remember? The truth was but it's all linked. You can't. That dreadful call Sangeeta took last weekend from the fella saying that Rishi Sunak could never be British and various other racist tropes. It's all part of the same process. It's just, for every a person who believes something toxic, there's probably a million of them for every person that will do something truly vile. It's 10:45. 10:48 is the time. I don't know that it is a conversation we can have in this format, really, but we are going to go back to it. I told you we would. I wasn't sure quite when or how, but immigration is about, I think it's about to dominate the national conversation again, because nothing else really works, does it? Trying to get you really angry about woke. What was it? Tofu-eating wokerati are coming to nick your biscuits. I know you'd have to be absolutely out to lunch to fall for that gibberish. And what else are they? Oh, yeah, they're pulling down your statues. It just doesn't land, does it? It doesn't give you that hit right in the hates in the way that telling you to hate foreigners does. What else have they done? Like Black Lives Matter, that was good. That one had legs, didn't it? If you pardon the pun, given that kneeling was a large part of the process. You had senior government ministers coming out, essentially siding with the racists who were booing the footballers protesting against racism. But it was never going to dominate the news agenda in the way that immigration can, because it was largely confined to a single football tournament. Remember, was it 30p Lee who said he wasn't going to watch it? He wasn't going to watch England play football because the players took a knee for a minute before the game started. And that is the mark of modern British conservatism. That's your post-Brexit Tory party in a 30p shaped nutshell. But immigration, it had to come back because nothing works like immigration works. Nothing. And the more hatred hang on, we can't really turn them against Poles anymore because we've abolished their freedom of movement. And by the way, we also abolished our own, but that was a small price worth paying to have enormous shortages of staff in the NHS and the hospitality sector and veterinary surgery. In fact, every sector in the country's got enormous shortages, but that was a small price to pay for the absolute win of getting rid of European people from this country. But now, so we can't go. Who are we going to go after? We can't go after them. We need them. They've got visas. We can't go after them. Let's go after the refugees. Oh, look, here's a story showing that a disproportionate number of Albanians have been coming over in the last few months. Two questions. What's wrong with Albanians? Well, probably in this case, something, actually, given that organised crime seems to be a large part of it. So why would you use successful attempts by Albanian criminals to turn your hatred upon genuine refugees from places like Syria and Afghanistan? Answer, because you're a massive racist. 10:51 is the time. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Ray's in Luton. Ray, what would you like to say?
Hi. Well, I'm a third-year broadcast journalism student. I'm hopefully going to be graduating this year. I suppose I'm just... I've just been thinking a lot. To be honest, it's headlines like this and little third paragraphs like this.
Well, it's the third more than the headline. Petrol bomber attacks migrant centre is relatively, I mean, that's fairly straightforward.
Yeah, we'll let that one go.
But it came amid new fears over the number of arrivals.
Yeah,
I mean, to be fair to the Daily Mail, if it had been a different sort of terror attack, if it had been an Islamist terror attack, then it's unlikely that the speculation about what the motivation might have been would tally with their editorial line of the last 20 years. So, you know, they couldn't write a story like that, but here it is. This is where we are now.
Yeah, I suppose it's just that things like this make me question, make me question how to change things from the inside, I suppose. If this is the industry that I want to go into and be a part of, how do you change the narrative when it does seem to be so entrenched now? I'm writing an essay at the moment about ethical reporting and journalism, and some of the research that I've had to do, I've been confronted with a lot of this hatred, and it does make me feel so sad. I just suppose, how do you change? How do you change the narrative?
There's two. I mean, if you're asking me on a personal stroke professional level. Crikey, I don't know that we can turn this into a regular feature, but I'm happy. I'm happy to answer your questions just with my own two penneth. The one way is, of course, stories. So, in the way that one refugee or asylum seeker who turns out to be violent or to have ill intention is used to try to portray the whole constituency of humans, you tell the stories that challenge that rhetoric, that challenge that narrative. So you look at people like Wahid Aryan, the doctor up in Cheshire, who's doing incredible work in so many different fields. And also, people you will know, all of the stories of refugees, all of the stories of second-generation Britons who've made enormous contributions to this country. So that's one corrective to it. And the second, sadly, and very exhaustingly, is just to keep doing what you're doing today and keep doing what I'm doing today, just in the hope that every now and then a light bulb will come across someone's head and they'll just go, why am I living my life in a state of constant hatred and fury? I don't want to. And all you got to do is pull the switch and it goes off again. And it's baby steps, and there's nowhere near the media platform for people telling the truth or asking humane, decent questions as there is for people screaming blue murder from the rooftops. But you have to keep believing, Ray. You can't give up. You can't give up.
Thank you.
You can't give up on good.
You don't think it is so entrenched now that there's no way of reversing it? Because I must admit, in some of, there have been times when I've thought to myself, if I was offered a job on the sort of paper that would want me to put out these stories, and it was good for me, because morally I'd have to turn it down, but.
I understand what you're saying, and you know, again, we're going quite personal on this, but I have friends who work. No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, that's what no point doing this unless we're going to be completely open with each other. I have friends who have and who are on the staff of some of the newspapers that we are both thinking of, and who may. I was trying to think. I don't think specifically being responsible for the reporting, but certainly when they become senior members of staff, that they have editorial control over some of the columnists and things like that. And it is tricky. When you're in it, you feel it a lot less. When you're on the outside, having sort of moral quandaries, you feel it a lot more. When you're in it, you're just too busy to worry too much, and you think, that did well, that got a lot of clicks, let's see if we can do something similar to that. But again, you've got to keep pushing. Either that or become a sports journalist, Ray.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. I know literally nothing about
and in broadcast, I know you get into journalism from any angle you can, but in broadcast journalism, things are still generally a lot better than they are in print. In print, you've got The Guardian, which sells a pitiful number of newspapers now, and the Daily Mirror. Everyone else, every other outlet is dedicated to the kind of right-wing rhetoric of varying degrees that you describe, but you won't be writing about immigration. You won't be writing. I didn't. I wrote about showbiz and then video game reviews for the Daily Mail, but even that possibly should have had a little bit more of a moral question mark hanging over it. I don't know. Good luck, though, in your studies, and most recently with that essay. Crikey, ethical journalism. There's people editing newspapers who wouldn't know what that is. They think ethics is a county in East Anglia. Ben's in Brighton. Ben, what would you like to say?
I'm not quite sure, James, that I can be quite as optimistic as either yourself.
You have to be.
I'm trying, but I recently went to St Leonard's Warrior Square, just near Hastings.
Yeah.
I got off a train. It was around 8 o'clock in the evening, and there was a group of teenagers, and I would say the oldest would have been about 14 or 15 years old, attacking a young boy, or a 19-year-old, I guess he would be, but he looked a lot younger than that. And he turned out to be a Somali asylum seeker. I sort of saw them off. The kids, but I walked him back to this centre that he was being held at. His asylum thing was being processed, so he was allowed to kind of leave one of the big centres and go to what essentially works out as a kind of a bed and breakfast, I suppose.
Yes.
The conditions were not amazing. I mean, I would certainly not have wanted to live there.
Nigel Farage told me that they're all in 5-star hotels, Ben.
But no, they are really. They are a really tiny room. You share a bathroom. It's not nice.
I know.
I mean, the one good thing I would say about those places is the fact that there's a lot of people that spoke his language there, which must have been a blessed relief. I did manage to get some information out of him. He didn't know any longer, and I can't. I mean, if this was happening to me, I don't know how I'd even be able to sleep at night. But he no longer knew where his mother and father or brothers and sisters were. He himself had the most appalling scars on his back that he showed me, which I don't know what they came from. It looked like whipping or slashing wounds of some sort. And I thought to myself afterwards, the kids that did this, that attacked him when he not slashed him on the back, obviously that happened in Somalia, but the kids that attacked him as he was coming into St Leonard's, as he left the train and was walking to the place where he was supposed to be staying, they don't read the Daily Mail, they don't read the Telegraph. I mean, they're 13, 14, 15 years old. So somehow or other, that hatred's gotten into them.
No one's suggesting it's... no, of course not. I mean, it's chicken and egg, isn't it? It's tail wagging dog. And also parents do. Social media, I get the messages about refugees are so loud that you'd have to be living up a mountain not to hear them, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I think you're right.
Conversations at home.
By the way, that your show and shows like it, you mentioned Sangeeta's show. I actually had the bad fortune,
the dubious pleasure.
Yeah, the dubious pleasure, beautifully put. But I do think those shows do a tremendous amount of good.
Go on. You've taken me up to the news, so I'll take that.
I certainly think that they help, and I certainly think when I've introduced people to your show, they have moved a little bit. They really have. And I've heard several callers on your show saying as much.
Well, yes, but that's why you got to keep on doing it. Of course it is. But equally, there'll be... I can't imagine anyone changing their mind in the opposite direction, going from a position of being quite decent and humane and listening to this programme and coming away thinking, no, actually, I do hate foreigners. But it is baby steps, Ben, and it is all you can do is keep telling the real stories, keep telling the real stories and keep pointing out what's going on. So I think stuff like this helps, I really do. If this attack in Dover had been undertaken by someone with brown skin who was doing it in the name of his warped interpretation of Islam, just imagine for a minute if the third paragraph of the Daily Mail's report on its front page were to be offering up possible justifications or just causes for it. Imagine if the hatred of these people, the dehumanising of these people, wasn't government policy. And you'd probably be living in a very different country. 4 minutes after 11 is the time. Very good morning to you. Change of pace now, although I suppose in a sense one of the stories which explains why the Conservative, the post-Brexit Tory party and the right-wing media are going to be desperate to reignite immigration-related anger and fury, anything to distract from the consequences of 12 years of Tory rule, cheered every step of the way by the usual suspects in the British media. But this is a worry. 1 in 3 key workers are on the brink of quitting their jobs in a mass exodus that would cause public services to crumble. It's the TUC that have undertaken the research. They have concluded that about 1.8 million public sector workers have already taken steps to leave their profession or are actively considering it. Now, we're going to talk to people in that category. I'll just remind you that we're talking about I think most obviously police officers, teachers, nurses, and care staff. If you're in the public sector and you're in a different sector, then you are more than welcome as well. But if you're one of those four things, straight to the front of the queue with you: police officers, teachers, nurses, and care staff who are, let's get the phraseology correct, who have already taken steps to leave their profession or are actively considering it. That's the conversation we're going to be having in the next hour. And I'm going to choose my words carefully, because I'm a bit Pollyanna-ish, as you know. I'm very glass half full, so I'm trying to come up now with ways of repeating or relating this story that is not as alarming as perhaps the headlines allow. A third of public sector workers ready to resign. It's a YouGov poll for the TUC. There's about 5.5 million workers, of course, on their books, and it found that 32% are investigating how to leave their jobs amid below-inflation pay rises. So cynically, you would go, well, that's very convenient, isn't it? Because that might put some pressure on employers to increase those below inflation pay rises. Less cynically, I would say, well, what are you going to do instead? Where are these above inflation pay rises that you're getting? Or, and as far as I can tell, the research doesn't explore this particular possibility, or it's going to be another addition to that thing that I increasingly think is of quite profound economic and social significance. These people that are just stepping right back from it. Particularly if you're in the public sector, you're more likely to have paid into a decent pension for the last 20 or 30 years, aren't you? And therefore you've done your sums, you've done your calculations, and you've thought, why do I still do this every day? Why do I still put up with this every day? The job is not what it was when I signed up. It's got worse. Let's add firefighters and social workers to that list. I only read out the four that are in the Times report of it. I wasn't making any value judgments of my own, but already my inbox is pinging with suggestions of other professions that should be included. So I suppose in my attempts to persuade myself that this is not as bad as it looks, I would say, well, just because you're thinking of it, I mean, lots of people think of changing jobs. Even I occasionally think of changing jobs. Get, an interesting phone call of someone setting up an exciting new a British equivalent to the Sirius satellite broadcasting station or whatever it may be, or someone coming up with a business model where we'd kind of do with what we do on the radio, what someone like Dan Snow has done with his history broadcasts, and you have that little, and that would count under this as actively considering leaving, well, not leaving the profession actually, would it? So no, it's not quite the same. But how many people, particularly on a Monday, wake up on a Monday morning and have a little think about doing something else? So how do we know, when we look at this research, how many people are waking up on a Monday morning and wishing that they did something else for a living, and how many people are actually manning the lifeboats, preparing the escape route, getting ready to hit the road? And we'll never know. We won't be able to put numbers on it, but I am looking at 6 absolutely crucial areas of public life and public service in this country. And I want you to tell me why you are one of them. Okay? So let me give you some of the suggestions put up by Frances Grady, the General Secretary of the TUC. She says that key workers in the public sector, first of all, she points out they helped get the country through the pandemic, and then goes on, many are now at breaking point because of a toxic mix of low pay, unsustainable workloads, and a serious lack of recognition. That last one resonates, doesn't it? I suppose it's the hardest to actually understand. You know exactly what low pay is, and you know exactly what an unsustainable workload is. But lack of recognition, I'd love to hear how you used to feel better appreciated, better valued. After years of brutal pay cuts, nurses, teachers, refuse workers, we'll put them on the list, and millions of other public servants have seen their living standards decimated and now face more pay misery. It is little wonder that morale is through the floor and many key workers are considering leaving their jobs for good. And this is all part of a clarion call for decent pay rises across the public sector. Otherwise, large-scale public sector strike action over the months ahead is going to focus the government's mind, just as the entire country obviously suffers some of the consequences. So 10 minutes after 11 is the time. When I started doing this job, one of the first mysteries I came up against, I wasn't, have you got a minute? It's only 10 past. I promise not to do a 20-minute monologue on this one. I'll try and hit it at quarter past. But if you got, can I go in for a minute just on the personals? I wasn't very political when I started doing this job. You don't believe me, do you? I really wasn't. In fact, we had a management here not long after I arrived who didn't want us to talk about the news. We had an experiment in talking about, do you remember that? We had a little experiment in talking about other stuff, like what's your favourite biscuit? Or what colour is your front door? I quite enjoyed it, I've got to be honest with you. But after a couple of months, it all began to feel a little bit empty, a little bit low calorie, as it were. And I have, over the years that I've been doing this job, become incredibly... In fact, I did an event not long ago with my former editor from the Daily Express, a wonderful woman called Rosie Boycott. And she took me by surprise a bit because it was in front of a live audience. And she turned to me, she said, "What happened to you then? So you weren't political at all when you were my showbiz editor. You were obsessed with the Spice Girls and George Michael. Since when did you become this political?" It was during the post-Brexit bit where suddenly I was everywhere. I don't know if you remember. It was awful. It was great, but a bit of false modesty goes a long way. And I sort of said, well, it's talking to people. I have become politicised, possibly even radicalised in a good way, by talking to people. And at the very top of that list, public sector workers. Regular listeners now will know exactly which section of the public sector it was that flicked a massive switch for me politically. All together now. Firefighters. It was when firefighters felt compelled to take industrial action after attempts were made to essentially rewrite the terms and conditions of employment that had prompted them to sign up for the fire service decades previously. And absolutely appalling, to my mind, just to my sense of natural justice. And then something really weird happened. So if you're relatively new to the programme and you wonder why I'm always wanging on about right-wing media, this is where it began. Because I was easily capable of being part of the right-wing media as a younger man. It's just pure luck that I didn't, possibly even bad luck, they didn't hire me. I'd have taken the job, wouldn't have had Ray's problems, who we spoke to earlier. But I started reading columns by people I knew and liked. People whose homes I had been to for dinner, right? I started reading columns about how awful firefighters were. Firefighters taking industrial action to protect the contractual terms and conditions that they had signed up to decades previously. The employer was trying to rip them up, if you like, and put them on completely different, and they believed largely unsafe footings. And I was reading columns by people I used to get drunk with in the pub. I used to go around to their houses for raucous dinner parties. And I was reading columns about how they've all got second jobs and some of them commute from Ibiza. And I don't know why. I don't think a sort of unduly romantic about firefighters, but it had never crossed my mind that they could ever be the target of tabloid hatred. I just thought naively that the people who run into a burning building when we are running out of them, or when we are being carried out of them by their colleagues, would be above the kind of treatment that was normally reserved for Labour politicians, say, or trades unionists, militant trades unionists, actual firefighters, not just the leadership of the FBU, but your actual firefighters, your membership, taking industrial action. I changed during the course of that conversation. I genuinely changed. I changed forever. I kind of realised I live in a country where huge amounts of effort and expenditure are dedicated to trying to undermine ordinary working people. In this case, actual firefighters standing up for the rights that they already had, that their employer was trying to take away. And that is when I started wondering about how successfully the forces that we talk about so much on the programme had persuaded ordinary members of the public that public sector workers were their enemy. And look at this list. Police officers. Oh, yeah, woke police. Yeah, they never solve any burglary. They've been warning us for years that cuts were going to decimate their ability to do their job. Did we pay any attention? No. Theresa May went to the Police Federation conference, stood on a stage and told them that cuts had nothing to do with crime, and they made her Prime Minister a couple of years later. Nurses generally get away with it at the moment. They've not, unless, of course, they contemplate industrial action, in which case they're straight on the guillotine. Firefighters, well, we know what happens to them. Social workers, imagine how horrific it is as an overworked, underappreciated social worker when one of the children that you're supposed to be keeping an eye on is killed at the hands of their carers. And you become public enemy number one in the national newspapers. Brain-dead tabloid sensibilities start attacking you, or even the person in charge of the department, which is operating on fumes, to use a motoring analogy. Police officers, teachers, nurses, care staff, firefighters, social workers. 2 questions. Why are you thinking of leaving? Full stop. That's up. Well, it's not full stop, actually. It's question mark, isn't it? Keep up. Why are you thinking of leaving? Question mark. 0345 606 0973. Talk the rest of us through it. And none of this could have happened. None of this could have happened. The years of low pay, unsustainable workloads, a serious lack of recognition, which is a bit of a euphemism, isn't it? A serious lack of recognition. I would say public demonisation of most of these professions. Why have we, and by that I mean the rest of the public that isn't in the public sector, why have we been so successfully persuaded that these people don't deserve our support or our sympathy? So if you're in the public sector and you're thinking of knocking it on the head, just give me the whys and the wherefores on 0345 606 0973. Listen, numbers would be helpful. When they talk about pay rises and pay cuts, numbers would be helpful. Living now on X when previously you were living on X times 10. I want to hear it. I want your story. Morale, why is that? What does lack of recognition mean? Why is that contributing to your contemplations about quitting? And then for the rest of us who aren't in the public sector, why have we been so successfully persuaded not to look after these people when they have dedicated their lives to looking after us? 20 minutes after 11 is the time. It's a pretty grim statistic for any country, but for a country that's already facing huge shortages across almost all of these sectors, it's a terrifying one. No wonder the government are keen for you to talk instead about immigration. And in fact, the story of what's going on in Manston it's actually huge. It's Suella Braverman who, it's hard to keep up with the scandals that have engulfed her over the last few days, isn't it? Let me see if I can keep up. But she's almost certainly lying about what happened with regard to her trying to send documents to a backbench MP. In fact, what I found amazing about the coverage at the weekend, and indeed I'm afraid some of the interviewing on the political shows was appalling, because Michael Gove, who's very good, God, I used to enjoy Michael Gove's performances, just on a rhetorical level as a sixth form debater. I used to quite enjoy watching him turn on a sixpence and persuade people that black was white and the moon was made of cheese. Those were the days when I didn't realise the stakes were so high. But what Gove was doing yesterday was saying that she'd owned up and she'd owned up to her mistake. But what she owned up to, I mean, this is the mad thing about the Suella Braverman, Leaky Sue story, is that she was essentially, the defence is that she apologised for accidentally sending a sensitive document to someone who shouldn't have received it. But she accidentally sent a sensitive document to someone who shouldn't have received it, while she was deliberately sending a sensitive document to someone else who shouldn't have received it. And then when his inbox didn't show the sensitive document that he should never have received as arriving, she tried to send it to his wife. But hey-ho, if you thought that the tolerance of corruption or appalling conduct was going to go with Boris Johnson, then I'm afraid you were being a tad naive. But that's not what we're talking about now. We're talking about the public sector. Caris is in Rugeley in Staffordshire. Caris, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. So I'm actually a newly qualified social worker, but I'm seeing it's a very interesting time to come into social work, as I'm sure you can imagine.
Yes, I can.
And I'm just seeing absolute catastrophe. So I've just finished Frontline, which is a fast-track program for getting people into social work. I previously worked in a residential care home.
Okay.
And I've been taught the highest levels of practice that I am now not seeing, because everyone, I don't want to use the word hysterical, but I'm seeing what like social workers cry in the office most days at the moment. We have a toilet that's been dubbed the crying room, because, you know, we're working in safeguarding, we're working with very high risk, and our thresholds are so high at the moment.
What does that mean?
That means that our threshold basically for our involvement with families have to be very, very high. So things that we usually would have done very proactively.
You can't get involved until certain thresholds have been reached.
It's extremely reactive, And, you know, our family practitioners, family time workers, all people that are integral to social care have been cut because, we only can have the people that we need under austerity, but a lot of our time is taken up with private law and court proceedings. So our actual job of protecting children, unfortunately, is not being done at the moment. And this continued scapegoating in the media, I know social workers are very,
Why do you think that is? You must have given it some thought when you were
absolutely
thinking of applying.
Family, it's literally a human right that families have a right to private life. It's Article 8. And when we go in, we have to be very respectful and say, we understand we're coming into your home. We're not necessarily judging parenting, but we're pointing out things we have issue with. There's a lot of things that may have gone on for a long time. So domestic violence, substance misuse, child sexual abuse.
People are very good at hiding it. People are very good at hiding it.
Extremely good at hiding it. And it's our job to highlight that because we are the voice of the child. And as adults that have maybe not respected their children's autonomy or been abused themselves as children, it's a lot. And so we need to be in a calm state of mind to do that. Safeguarding it takes a lot of mental energy. It takes a lot of time. And these are things that no one has at the moment.
How surprised, you knew things weren't hunky-dory, right? When you
absolutely not.
How surprised have you been by how unhunky-dory they are?
Very, actually. And I like to think of myself as very perceptive. I knew I wasn't going into, I didn't have rose-coloured glasses on about social work. But, I've heard social workers saying they can't do it anymore. Our vacancies are the highest they've ever been. We literally cannot take on new people because no one wants to do it. And, for example, one of the workers that I've never seen lose it was swearing in the office today. And this is someone that is usually extremely level-headed. And that was my moment where I was like, if I'm watching them break, then
have you cried?
I haven't, but I'm on a protected caseload at the moment. So the recommended.
So you're easing your way into it, so to speak.
I am legally protected. It's a bit like being a newly qualified teacher, but it's very hard. So I'm trying to help everyone around me whilst learning myself, and it's just. We tell children that they can't learn if they're in chaos.
No, we do.
How can workers protect if we're in chaos?
How many people?
It's really sad.
How many people do you think are contemplating jacking it in?
I've literally watched about 6 people leave since I started in September, and we're quite a small office.
And what sort of age were they?
A lot of them late 20s, early 30s. Some people that have been it for years.
It's not early retirement or anything like that.
No, this is people very new to the profession that are already extremely disillusioned and like, what's the point? And, we can go into private social care and do family law, but, social workers are usually, this is a massive generalization, quite ethical people. We don't go in it for the money. We go in it because we care. And these are people that are throwing those morals to the side and saying, I need the money and I don't want the stress. And that's really sad. I've actually considered myself going on emergency duty, which is where you don't have a rapport with families.
Right.
And you can make a lot of money. You're just doing reactive things. But I'm not there yet. I'll have to see where the next few years go. I absolutely love my job and it's breaking my heart. I'm actually getting a bit emotional talking about it now.
I can tell you are. And I wish I could do more than just wish you well, but I can't.
I'm gonna be an MP one day. I've been political as long as I can remember.
Keep in touch,
yeah, absolutely.
They won't let you talk to me when you're an MP. Well, of course they will, unless you join that lot. Caris, thank you. Hi, James, Alex. Yeah, I'm a child protection social worker in the Southwest. My team is seriously understaffed. Social workers leave and aren't replaced because nobody applies. Morale is through the floor. My colleagues all try so hard and do the best they can, but the situation is now intolerable. The irony is that we spend so much time doing the job unpaid in our own time, there's no overtime in social work, that we have little time to see our own families. I'm leaving the profession. Jess is in Brighton. Jess, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jess.
I used to work for the police. I was in the police for 17 years, and I left at the start of this year, mainly because I was exhausted.
Yeah.
You join because you want to help, but you don't. You don't help anyone. The workload has got so bad that no matter what you do, you're risk assessing everything, and you can't risk assess everything anymore. So you could be missing stuff. I was in the control room, so the calls would come to us, and we would risk assess it, and then get the officers out there. But we've got no officers, so the cuts.
Oh yeah, but that's because they're all out. That's because they're all out doing the lumbago at Carnival.
Well, again, as well. I mean, those
can't get it, Pat. You can't get one over on me, Jess. You're all out doing woke policing.
but that's the trouble with like Carnival and stuff. It's officers have had their days off cancelled to go to it, to police it. So no one wants to go there. That it's because it's a nightmare of a job to do. But the workload that's coming in is horrendous. Like I say, you have to risk assess everything.
When did was there a pivot? If you look back, I think, when did you knock it on the head?
I knocked it in the head at the beginning of this year.
In January.
I was done.
When you look back, was there a point at which you felt, well, a tipping point they call it, don't they? Or was it just incremental? It was just straws and camels and backs?
I can pinpoint when they did major changes that made the workload become impossible. They made super boroughs, what they call super boroughs.
Right.
So they amalgamated areas to make them bigger areas, because then there would be more police out there.
Right.
But there's not. It's the same amount of police doing the same amount of areas. And you don't have enough. So if you've got a troublesome area, the areas that weren't so troublesome and do need police won't get them, because they're dealing with the areas that are worse.
I understand. And then we wonder why, street crime in particular is confined to certain postcodes, or largely confined to certain parts of town. It's a simple policing. Malcolm Gladwell writes about this very persuasively, actually, about going in hard on very specific tiny areas with lots of police presence, and the benefits then spread to the whole of the surrounding area. But if you ain't got the numbers, you can't do it. What are you doing instead, if you don't mind me asking, if anything?
You might hate me for saying it.
I hope not.
I became a train driver.
Why would I hate you for saying that?
Because everyone who does, with all the train strikes and everything, which, I mean...
thought you were going to... I didn't know what you were going to say then. I was getting quite worried. I thought you might be doing something naughty.
It's just because people think that train
not on this show, flipping heck. They're not on this show. We're literally talking about people who have had their terms and conditions turned upside down. Train drivers may not be public sector workers so much anymore, but I think a lot of the principles stand. They've at least got the privilege and the right, the basic right of decent trade union representation. Thank you, Jess. I was worried then. I didn't know what she was going to... I thought she was going to say, I've become a Daily Mail columnist. Well, it's 11:31. Lottie Morley's here now with your headlines. It is 25 to 12. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I want to run through that Manston Migrant Processing Centre story, because it is huge. It is, I think, a bit late for much of the media to wake up to some of the conditions in which people are being housed in these kind of facilities. Part of the problem, of course, is Farage and his filthy phalanx of supporters marching around the country claiming that they're all staying at the Savoy or something like that. But the reality of it is that the entire system is about to be, if it isn't already, completely overwhelmed, largely because they essentially refused to sort out accommodation. So a huge surge in numbers of people crossing the Channel, as you know, and a refusal to deal with them. Now, I don't know whether this is deliberate or not. It crossed my mind reading Robert Peston's done a very informative and detailed thread about it, that they figured that his explanation is that if they refused to house the people currently in the processing centre, to find them somewhere else to go on to, i.e. sort of bed and breakfast accommodation or hotels, that would put pressure on officials to find a way of speeding up the processing of asylum applications. But of course, they're probably working as hard as they can. We're back to the conversation we're having now about public sector workers. So Suella Braverman never booked any rooms for these people. Priti Patel booked a few, but then stopped months before she resigned. The definition of insanity, apocryphally, of course, is to keep doing the same thing over and over again in the hope of a different result. So they are now going to have to explain why they refuse to follow their own department's recommendations. That would be the Home Office. Grant Shapps, who was Home Secretary for a week, he did start to book rooms when he took over. Robert Jenrick has now revived the idea of booking rooms. He's been an immigration minister for 4 days. Shapps had signed off on the use of between 10 and 12 new hotels, but neither Patel or Braverman have ever even visited Manston. 4,000 asylum seekers sleeping on the floor at the moment. It's supposed to hold a maximum of 1,500 to 1,800. The conditions are described as very austere, according to a witness. No beds, no proper mattresses, blankets, a few rolled up mattresses, army style. It's like a giant village hall, said one source. The staff reportedly are amazing and the medical centre is good, but under English law, not European human rights law, the maximum length of stay is supposed to be 24 hours. Some people there have been there for 3 to 4 weeks, and they are, of course, asylum seekers, about 80% last time I checked, of whom at the moment have their applications successfully accepted. So, I mean, if this was a country that cared, this would be an enormous scandal. An enormous scandal. And what they're probably going to look at now is some form of legal action, which is what makes me think it might be deliberate. I could see them. Could you or not? Am I losing the plot? Could you see them relishing the chance of legislation, of legal action being brought by people forced to live in these circumstances? And even, of course, some Albanians who shouldn't be there and whose applications wouldn't be successfully processed will be liable for, I don't know, maybe I'm seeing things that aren't there, seeing castles in the sky. It's a prospect of the government having to pay out between 5 and 6 grand each to people who've actually been victims of a crime. It's breaking the English law. So the Home Office have said to the Home Secretaries, don't do this, it's illegal. And they've said, no, it isn't, we'll do it. Anyway, that's the story that's unfolding. Back to people quitting the public sector and why. Stuart's in Warwick. Stuart, what would you like to say?
Hello. So I don't think it's just nurses, policemen and things. It's also the military. I'm currently serving in the military and everybody's leaving in droves. They can't return staff. And I think the big part of that is because, as with all public sector, it's not being funded properly, so the workload's going up and up and up. And actually, the salary package is going down considerably. People that used to stick out for a number of years because actually they get this amazing pension and they could retire at 45, well, that's gone up to 68 now. So it's certainly not a reason to keep me. I don't care what my pension says on paper. If I don't get it until I'm 68 years old.
When did it? Well, it went up 23 years overnight.